welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's TSFA virtual learning demonstration. My name is Amanda and I'm the Education Assistant here at TSFA. We are pleased to offer these virtual learning demonstrations made possible by the Texas Flora Education Underwriters. TSFA's virtual learning will be archived and made available at tsfa.org, located under the TSFA On Demand tab. Today our guest speaker, Stacey, will be presenting one bouquet in 3 ways. Stacey is a floral designer, speaker, leader, and floriculturist. If you have any questions during the demonstration, please type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. I will bring them up during and at the end of the demonstration today. Now, without further ado, please welcome back Stacey.
Hi everybody, happy Friday. I'm coming to you from my home studio in the gloomy Midwest today. We have a rainy, kind of quiet day going on here. I'm really happy to be sharing some ideas about bouquets with you today. So why I chose one bouquet 3 ways is mostly because a lot of our bouquet approaches come from material-driven places. So oftentimes when I'm doing a bridal consult or a bouquet consult and somebody comes in, they love a certain flower. That might be all that they know. They don't really know too much else except for the varieties that they like. And it's really up to us to instill trust in our clients and vice versa, to get them to trust us to make them something that'll work for them and also speak to our artistic brand. The 3 bouquets that we're gonna discuss today might not be the easiest thing to sell in your shop, in your studio, at your business. Maybe some of the techniques can be applied in other ways. We're gonna discuss that as we move through each one. All 3 bouquets are very different from one another. I actually have them all completed, but we're gonna backpedal, show the techniques from the bottom up, and then we will go over the build visually. We have 2 camera angles for you today, so you guys will get to see techniques in fine detail. And by all means, please keep the conversation going. I often feel like we all learn better by speaking and asking questions, so I encourage questions. If you don't come up with them now, please feel free to send them later. Don't hesitate to ever reach out, because I want to make sure that anything that you see today that you're feeling a little unclear about, that we clarify for you. So without further ado, we're going to get started on one of 3. I love circles. Can you guys tell? They're in a lot of my work. So today, the first bouquet, in my mind, is meant more for a bridesmaid, possibly, or a bride that is looking for something minimalistic and simple, who also has an artistic edge. There is a lot of ways that we can use circles in our work, not just in bouquets. This kind of shape has become popular for wall hangings and for wreaths in maybe like the past 5 to 6 years. So maybe this doesn't speak to your bridal client, but I encourage you to maybe make one, put it up on your Instagram, put it in your gallery on your website, because you never really know who might be encouraged to try something a little bit new. So Amanda, let's look at that other view for a second, and we'll show some detail here. One sec, guys. Okay. So as you see, the hoop that I'm working with here is an embroidery hoop, just a very inexpensive wooden circle. You can use a number of different circles, metal, anything like that, but the nice thing about these wooden circles is not only are they inexpensive, but they're extremely lightweight and they're very easy to procure. So I'm going to show you here on this view how we build this from the bottom up. The way that I started is by wrapping oasis bind wire around one of the sides. So just by taking the bind wire in and very tightly twisting it. 2 to 3 twists should do. And we want to do the tail on the inside. This way you don't have to worry about any jagged edges on the outside of your piece. So we start with that, and we can leave that little tail there until we're done with our bouquet. You're going to pull the Oasis fine wire taut to the other side and wrap it through. It's a good idea to leave it on the spool for now until you know how much you're going to use for your project. So I've taken it around, wrapped it through, and I'm coming back to the opposite side. And basically you're just repeating this step. So on my existing bouquet, I think I did about 7 or 8 passes. The materials that you will choose will determine how many passes you'll want on your piece. If your materials are heavier, you might want to do more. Perhaps you like the aesthetic of the lines, and you might want to add more just for form, not just function. And in addition to vine wire, you could be using things like yarn, if you'd like, string, but to me, the workhorse here, this Smithers Oasis vine wire will never steer you wrong. It's always a great option. And it comes in so many colors. So I'm gonna start to kind of determine how many more passes I'm gonna need. I'm gonna do maybe about 3. So now I'm gonna cut myself a generous tail on my vine wire. So this way, when I'm in this situation here, I can still wrap it without having to thread through the large spool of the vine wire. So imagine if you were going to do something that's a little bit more permanent, maybe with drives, or maybe this bouquet isn't going to be your thing in your shop or in your studio, but maybe you'll do a piece like this for the holidays and do a whole bunch of yarn, and maybe you just want to hang, I don't know, a couple feathers off this side or something like that. So try to think outside the box with this technique. Still wrapping, wrapping, and now that I'm here, I'm just going to finish it off on the side. It's good to come back through your loop just like this, thread it through, and wrap it. Now, that little tie I have here, I'm actually going to twist it off 2 times.
So Stacey?
Yes.
Do you not need to glue each side?
Correct, you do not. But I'm really glad that you brought that up. If you're concerned about this being strong enough, which I don't blame you, because depending on the materials, you may need a higher mechanic. You may get a very small drill bit and drill holes into the wood if you're using a wooden embroidery circle. Now, if you're doing something like metal, you could always do an Oasis U-glue dash in one little spot. Of course, do it on the inside. That way, when you start your wrapping, it'll give you some traction for the first binding point. I don't encourage you to use a ton of U-glue, but maybe 1 on each side will help you get the project flowing. But as you see, all I did was use the vine wire straight on the wood, and with the right amount of tension and focus, this is strong enough to start the build. So very, very, very lightweight to get started. And now moving forward, depending on your materials, I'm going to show you what I have here is these ring neck pheasant feathers from Knut Nielsen. And also, this is called wild grass in natural. It's very long. So you can tell these pieces are about 4 feet. This is how I started the mechanics on my circle, was with the feathers and also the wild grass. The way these wild grasses come is they are connected down here at the bottom, and then up at the top, they're nice and loose. If you look at the proportions of this, it's very, very, very long. So perhaps you don't want this whole piece, But when you start your weaving process, it's beneficial to keep this piece with all of them connected as your first thread through your structure. So this part, it doesn't take much, but just natural tension and weaving throughout your piece. So all I did was come up through the bottom, I went over the top, and I came through the side. So now you can see that this proportion is very, very large. So I'm going to actually take one piece out just to make it a little bit softer and more graceful. And then I'm going to trim the piece over here in an artful way, kind of on an angle, because I think that that piece was adding too much length. So now I'm just starting my weaving process. What this first layer is going to allow you to do is when you start to add your fresh materials, it'll give you a base to use the Smithers Oasis cold glue, and also will give you a solid form to have as your background for your flowers. So as you see, I just repeated that step with that green neck pheasant feather. And this one is a nice proportion to the size hoop that I have. And Amanda, if you would go back to the other view so I can show you the finished piece. So when you look at the size of this embroidery hoop, this is definitely much smaller than some of them that you've seen before. And if you reference even the round shelf on my wall, I've used them that size or even larger. So let's say you're making a wall hanging, or let's say, I don't know, maybe you have a bride that really wants a theatrical, really large hoop. You're gonna wanna adjust your proportions to be appropriate for the next size up. You also, if you have a larger circle, will need to do more of your cross sections for your mechanics on the actual hoop. Now, I know that some of you may say, I could never sell that to a bride or a bridesmaid. But actually, Arthur Williams and I sold something very similar to a real life wedding, which is published in our new book. I actually have one right behind me. And that's going to be available on my website. Right now it's available on wildflowermedia.com. So you'll see that even though it seems outside the box, we were able to sell it to an existing customer, and it was one of my favorite weddings I've ever been a part of. We repeated the circle throughout the theme, including at the ceremony visit. So think outside the box. And if somebody doesn't understand the custom nature of it, it's up to you to showcase it on your social media and your website, just to give people kind of an idea. So Amanda, I know we're hopping back and forth, but let me have you go back to that close-up for a second, please. And I'll talk about the materials that I used. So after I did that foundation, this foundation, the next step is I started to weave seeded eucalyptus and broomcorn into the piece. Now, if you are going to have this done way in advance for a client, you could add dried materials to this days before. Potentially it could be all dried, but that way you can do a bunch of this beforehand, and then you can add fresh materials if they do choose so. I have a collection of mums here, Phalaenopsis amabilis, and all those were procured here locally in Chicago. All available at your Texas State underwriters, of course, local to you. But I don't know if you guys can forage ginkgo biloba locally. That's the only thing. I don't know, Candy, you guys have ginkgo by you, Amanda? I don't believe so.
Not that I know of.
Yeah, it's a beautiful tree. And actually, typically it grows green, but in the fall, we're blanketed in these golden yellow leaves. So actually, about an hour ago, before we turned on our Zoom, I ran just in my front yard and grabbed them to show you, because I like to touch of yellow with our fall. So we have the mums, orchids, a little ginkgo, the broomcorn, and then also the seeded euc in addition to those dried materials. And it's very inexpensive. Just with those touches of cold glue, it's very easy to make, and once again, incredibly lightweight. So if you could go back once again to that other view for me. It's nice to have it to be carried like this. If you wanted it for a wall hanging, you could always add some ribbon or something like that for an extra touch. If you like something a little bit more asymmetrical, that's totally fine. Just be mindful of the actual physical balance when you're creating it. So there's a reason why I balance things the way that they are on here. It feels really good in my hand. You wouldn't want somebody carrying it down the aisle in a different way. So you'd want to instruct your client for how they would carry it if this became a bouquet. So that's bouquet number 1. I'm gonna hang that back up. The next bouquet I would like to show is a round but structured bouquet. I'm going to show you how I created the structure on the outside, and we'll talk a little bit just about the mechanics about how to thread it through. So if you want to take a little close-up look at this, Amanda, before I put it down, you'll see that there's some really nice textures in there. Once again, repeats from our last bouquet with a couple new favorites in there. And I'll just show you kind of the patch weave work that we have here on the side is all with an adhesive cork ribbon from Smithers Oasis. So I'm going to show you how I built this structure, and then we'll come back to the finished product. Of course, now let me dry off my surface for you guys a little bit. Okay, so one of my favorite products that came out within the last few years that I use all the time is the Oasis Floral Mesh. This can be used in a number of ways, from really small detailed boutonniere and corsage work to big giant installations to also, of course, the structures and foundations of bouquets like we're going to show today. So it comes in a roll this size. This is it in gold. I really also like it in bronze as well, but gold I find disappears if you're trying to make the mechanic not totally show. I really like the gold, but I like gold everything, so that's not a surprise. Very easy to cut. I actually cut it with my Ohanas. You can, of course, have your heavy-duty wire cutters if you want to use that, but it's very easy to cut, so that's another bonus. When you're looking at the width of this project, I would advise that you do it in evens. So we have 2, 4, 6. If we do it in 6 and we're folding it in half, your bouquet base is going to be at least 3 of the squares wide. If you're trying this for the first time and you're keeping it kind of petite, I encourage you to go even smaller. So maybe 2 wide. But just for today's sake, I'm going to show you the 3. So actually, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. What I should have done prior is to trim off all of these loose ends, but I didn't. So watch me do that real quick. The amount, like the length that you're going to want to use is determined by how much you like the width and the diameter of the bouquet that you have. So in my opinion, a round bouquet that's structured like this looks better when it's petite. I don't really think that you need to have this as an overly large bouquet. I personally like it when my large bouquets seem a little bit more lightweight. And this style is so dense. So if you're going to try it, let's keep the diameter no larger than 12 inches. Okay, so now that I've trimmed, oh, it's tough to see. I hope you guys can see it okay. Now that I've trimmed those sharper edges off the sides, I'm going to fold it in half. So all I'm doing is taking the 2 sides, finding that middle seam, and folding my wire. So just like when we use poultry netting or chicken wire, you got to be mindful. Sometimes it can get a little scratchy. I encourage you to wear long sleeves. As I say this with my sleeves rolled up, that way you can avoid any issues with it. But it's not so bad when you take your time and control it. So now I've flattened it out. See that? So I've doubled it. All I've done is taken the 6 and made it into 3. I'm going to take the 2 ends and bring them together. So now you see I've made a circle with my wire. So I'm going to connect them here. I'm overlapping them about 3 of the squares just for strength and structure. The nice thing about any of these loose ends on the wire is you can take them and fold them back in on themselves. So see how I'm taking this piece and I'm just tucking it under there. That way it grabs onto the other piece of wire. So I'm not even using any additional wire to close off this wire because we're using it as form and function. If you would like to, do a double mechanic on this area, let me show you what you can do. You can use your bind wire. You can have small tails of it. And just reinforce these cross sections on an angle like this with bind wire. So I've done that, and I'm just going to do a double twist. But once again, it doesn't really need it in this case because we're going to go over it with adhesive cork ribbon anyway. So now we have the basic foundation for your bouquet. Now, the second step, I know this is kind of weird because the second step I'm actually going to make in the next bouquet. So we're gonna talk about that in about 5 minutes. But we're gonna move on to the third step, and I hope I don't lose you on that. But I didn't want to show that to you before we got to the outside here because the last bouquet I think is more of our finale piece. So we would actually create a false stem on the bottom of this, and that's what I'm going to show you in about 5 minutes how to do that with wire. Right now we're going to cover this with this cork ribbon by Smithers Oasis. So this ribbon is so fantastic. It has an adhesive backing, which is absolutely incredible. We're going to actually wrap it around, and we won't do the whole one because I'm going to go back to my finished piece to show you. But you can peel off the adhesive backing just like that to get it started. And attach it to the wire. And wrap it all the way around. So when I did my piece, I did 3 strips on the outside and only 1 on the inside here on the top part of the bouquet. I'll show you on my finished piece. I want to show you how I finish this off. So when you get down to this point, right here, where you're going to connect the adhesive, always cut adhesive ribbon with the backing on with scissors now. So you don't want to cut it with its sticky side exposed. It's much, much easier to cut it this way. So see how I just made that clean cut. Now it doesn't have to overlap because we're actually going to cover this all with lattice. So imagine that I did this for you 3 other times here. And now I'm going to take this ribbon and cut several pieces in square size. And I probably used about, 40 of these little squares to make my piece. So once this was all layered, I added additional texture to the outside of the bouquet by removing the adhesive and placing it on top to layer it. And it seems like a small detail, but when you have any type of bumps or grooves because you're going on top of the wire, these layers of these squares, the patchwork or basket weave, if you will, makes a big difference. So right now I'm going to get you the final piece, or the finished piece, excuse me, and show you what I'm talking about. And you can go back to the full screen for me, please. So as you can see, we talked about the top, only the top being done, but you can see that I did it in 3 strips. And then I added these different textures of the cork squares around it. Now, the adhesive cork ribbon is going to be the quickest, easiest, lightweight option. But Smithers Oasis, for example, has amazing different ribbons that even don't have adhesive. Perhaps maybe you want to try it with corrugated cardboard that you have left over in your shop or studio. Or maybe you have a bunch of really cool material, maybe denim or, I don't know, flannel, even some cool like holiday ribbons that you want to cut up and try to use. If you do that, you can always use the double face tape from Smithers Oasis and attach it to any of your existing fabrics or ribbons and use that, or the U-glue dashes, which of course are my favorite. But to me, this has got a superior adhesive if you're worried about really tacking it on. Of course, you can use glue or spray tack, but trust me, this is easy, fast, clean, and it's instant, the bond. So if you don't have the adhesive ribbon, you want to try your own thing, I still encourage you to get the double face tape and use that for your actual basket weave on the outside of the bouquet. Okay, so here's our finished product. And Amanda, if you go back to the detail shot for me one more time, please. So we have the basket weave in here. So if you can see all those little squares, I know it's a minute detail, but if you ask me, it's all in the details. So this is just that triple layer on the bottom and then all these little squares at the top. Now, when we talk a little bit about the handle, I'm going to come back to this one if we have time, but I want to show you the bottom of this. Do you guys see how I have Spanish moss on the bottom? This is a huge, huge help for a bouquet like this. So once you create your false stem and structure, which I'll show you just next for our next bouquet, you can layer Spanish moss, sheet moss, even different Excelsior products that you may have in your shop on the bottom of the bouquet to thread all of your flowers through. That way you have a solid base to work with. So if we come to full picture again, Amanda, even I didn't wrap this yet here because I wanted to make sure that you can see this. I didn't want any big ribbon. You can see the bottom is cleaner. You know, the Tillandsia, the Spanish moss isn't really the most brilliant or brightest option. So if you're looking for something with color, maybe go for something with color. If you've got more of a natural look, then maybe you choose to use the Spanish moss product, which to me is lightweight. I always have it around in my studio. And I actually kind of like the soft texture of the gray Tillandsia. So all of these flowers were threaded through just on that structure. I'm going to show you how to make in a few minutes, except for the Phalaenopsis, Amabilis, and once again, those few pieces of Ginkgo biloba that were all glued in on the top with the Smithers Oasis cold glue. You'd be surprised how long some of the items will last without water. So even though all of these would have a sufficient water source, if treated properly, the Phalaenopsis, the Ginkgo biloba will definitely last your client all day as long as it's not a really steamy, hot summer day. Always a fan of Crown and Glory, so you want to shoot that really good when your bouquet is all done and make sure to seal all the moisture. But that is bouquet number 2. Really lightweight, believe it or not, too. So our third and final bouquet is the largest of the 3. I'm going to show the final piece and then I'll show you how I made the base, which will apply to bouquet number 2 and bouquet number 3. So let me clear off my space a little bit for you. Okay. So here is bouquet number 3. This one is much larger, still incredibly lightweight, and you can see, again, all the same materials that you've been seeing in the last 2 pieces. So all 3 bouquets that we're showing today are very, very different. Still the same in spirit, could technically all be at the same party or all at the same wedding if you wanted to have something eclectic and different to offer your customer. And as you can tell, there's not that much product in this bouquet, but the perceived value is very, very high. So the diameter of this is very large, but keep in mind it could be done on a much, much smaller scale. Also, it can be done just like this as a bouquet and rested in a beautiful container or a vase and make a gorgeous tabletop piece as well. So maybe you can't convince a bride to do this, but I think it can make a really cool Thanksgiving centerpiece. So without further ado, let me show you how I created the base. I don't think I'll have room to keep this on the table, so I'll bring it back. I know we're close to finishing, but I promise I'll keep it quick. This part is so important, this structure. I've used it in so many different ways, not just as bouquet bases. I found that this technique will work in a number of different ways. All of these wires are straight Oasis floral wire that has been pre-taped. So you're seeing that this length is very long. The Oasis wire that I had today was the shorter version, so I had to use actually 4 wires to make this length. If you're doing a much smaller version, you don't need all that length. I wanted to show you the large version today, so you could scale it back yourself if you needed to. All you need to do is take your wire and tape it. Now, it's going to be easier to tape more than 1 wire together. I really like the 20 gauge, so I have 2 20 gauge wires here. To me, it's the perfect thickness for this. So yeah, of course, you could go with a thicker gauge and tape 1, but I feel like the traction's easier to tape 2 together. So if you want to go to the detail camera for me, Amanda, one last time, I'm just taking my 2 Oasis straight floral wires, taping the top, pulling and pulling and pulling and twisting as I go along. The trick to taping wires together is all in the pull. It's not in the twist. When you get down to the bottom, you're just gonna pull it off and trim it. Now, maybe you've done this for years. Maybe you're a seasoned pro and you've done it before. Maybe you've never done this before. But I encourage you, I'm gonna do it one more time, that if you haven't done it, practice, 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 practice. So I'm taking the tape on a 45-degree angle, folding it in and down and over. I am right-handed, although I'm not sure how this reads to you because I know we've got a funny camera angle for you. Pulling with my dominant right hand, twisting with my left. When I get down to the bottom, I'm just gonna pull it, tuck in the side. So this is a much smaller version of this. Any length that you choose, just make sure that you have an even number of wires. So right here, I actually have 14. The lower amount of wires you're gonna have, the wider your spider web is gonna be. The more wires you have, the tighter the foundation is gonna be. So I'm just gonna count the bottom of the wires on the table so they're even. Gonna take that floral stem wrap again, and I'm gonna tape all of the wires together into one. So that same technique we just showed you, taping the wires together, I'm showing you here, taping all of them into one. And remember, this video will be available for you to rewatch in case you want to see all of this again. I'm going to do one more pass, just for safety and smoothness. The length of your handle will matter depending on what you're choosing. Just be mindful. This is how long I've left mine, which is about 7 inches. Once these are all bound together, it's very difficult to trim them, even with a good wire cutter. So it's really important to really think about how long you want your handle prior. Okay, so now I'm gonna take each individual wire and I'm gonna put my thumb right here at the base and fold them out. You'll see a better view of this in a second. It's hard because this one gets a little bit big for my camera angle here. Folding them all out, folding them all out, getting stuck. Of course, I had to go big. It would have been too simple to go small for you guys. So now you're looking at the top view. We want to make sure that none of the wires are completely overlapped. You're going to turn it around, put it on the table. So now You want to try to kind of spread them apart a little bit, but it doesn't matter if it's equal or not. I like to press down on the handle to make sure it's very flat. And now comes the web part. So this is the part that might be a little bit tricky if you haven't done this before. There are so many ways to do this technique. This is only one of the ways. So don't be frustrated if this way doesn't work for you and you have a different version that works for yourself. I'm going to start my first bend about 2 inches up. I'm actually just taking my fingernail and bending the wire. So do you see that? And it doesn't have to be completely perfectly even. We want to strive for that as we go all the way around. We're going in and in. So these guys all have a little buddy. We're making kind of a diamond shape. In and in. Again, in and in. We're getting there. Hopefully you guys will stay with me because I really want to show you that finished piece before you go today. Okay. So now that we folded them all in like this, you can see they're starting to create a pattern. When you have this neighbor next to it, so this is its neighbor, these are the ones that we folded together. Oh no, I'm sorry, this is the one that we started with here. We're gonna take that top of the diamond and twist it twice. 1 and 2. See that? And we're just gonna go all the way around. Doesn't matter if you go clockwise or counter. Twist, twist. I promise that as you do this more and more, this technique, this part of this technique, shall I say, will only take you a few minutes. Twist and twist. We're getting there. Twist, twist. We're trying to keep our triangles and our diamonds as uniform as possible, which once again, for this technique and today's bouquet, it's actually gonna be covered. So if it's not completely perfect and you can tell this one is a little bit larger than this one, it's okay. You can always go back and edit it if you'd like to, but for today's exercise, it won't matter. So now we have our first layer. We're gonna move on to our second. Now these two partners are gonna come towards each other. And we're gonna twist again. So a double twist again. Once again, bend in, double twist, bend in, and a double twist. We're getting there, guys, and we're almost all the way around. So now you can see that with this one, we're starting to create a pattern. You'll see that we have these long pieces on the outside. So now we have our second layer finished. Typically for this size bouquet, I would keep going and I would repeat what we just did. So we would do another triangle and twist, twist, and again, all the way around. But now that you know the technique, and I know we're past time, we don't necessarily have to do all the way to the end if you don't want to. And also if you make it and it seems much, much, much too large for your project, the good news is you just grab your wire cutters and you can trim it as need be. So this shape of our spider web here is in a nice rounded parasol pattern. If you wanted something more asymmetrical, all you have to do is edit it however you'd like. You can fold these, bend these, shape these, and twist them, trim it in certain areas, and edit it as you please. So here's your bottom, nice and finished, and here's the top. So Amanda, if we can come to full view for a sec. So this one is slightly larger than the bouquet that I made. These tails, once again on the end, can be trimmed. You can use them as a mechanic to fold over any of your botanicals. Sky is the limit. With this bouquet, I took Spanish moss, And what I advise you to do is use spray adhesive on the actual structure and attach your Spanish moss to it, stretch it, pull it, wrap it around. But you don't really have to. It's just another extra mechanic if you choose. The same technique I showed you with weaving the dune grass, the wild grass, and the ring neck pheasant feathers was then done over this technique. So, just to recap, yes?
How do you make the wires long again?
You can just add more length. So, for example, when I showed how to do these short ones, all I would do is make an extender, meaning that these ones here, we can add as many wires to the bottom of it and just add more tape over it and make it longer. I advise doing one at a time. So see how I added one there? Now I'm taking another wire and I'm adding it again. Then you're making your wire as long as you need for your project. So it's really up to you how short or how long you make it. And the stem wrap is so great. The paraffin-based stem wrap will just make them all stick together with the heat and the tension of your hands while you're pulling and wrapping. So you can make it as short as you need and as little as you need, or you can extend it nice and long just by adding more wire. Hopefully that helps answer the question.
Thank you.
Of course. So the base of this, of number 2 bouquet, is exactly this structure on a much smaller scale. So I did this base of this one with only 8 wires, and I left them very short. I did them at this length. It's hard for you guys to see, at this length, instead of the extended length that I did on this larger parasol snowflake. So if you can see, you have a larger diameter bouquet like my third one down here that I'll pick up in a moment. Your extensions are going to need to be much, much longer. This can also be done into a cascade shape as well. So if you wanted to have some of your wires longer, you can continue this twist or even add on extra wires here and make the frame for a long cascade. Or you can do it on a much smaller scale like we did on bouquet number 2. So infinite possibilities, whether it's small for a fascinator, even if you wanted to make something kind of spooky and look like a spider web for Halloween, which is fun, or if you wanted to leave this part of the bouquet transparent because it's just so pretty, you can always do so either with more decorative stem wrap, which it comes in a lot of different colors, or I've used Design Master color tool and just sprayed right over my tape if I didn't have the color I wanted, just to kind of color shift it into something a little bit more decorative. So you can keep this all open if you really like your mechanics, or you can do something solid and cover it up. So we'll go back to bouquet number 3. And just, if you guys can see, you don't even see that structure anymore. It's completely disappeared. Why do we do it? Well, it's the framework for the entire expression that we have here. The sky's the limit. You can make them really big. You can make them much, much smaller. If these extensions are a little bit too aggressive for you, you can always trim them down as well. The same materials that we did in bouquet number 1, number 2, and number 3, just used in a much larger, kind of wilder, exploding versus imploding type of a manner. I hope that you enjoyed this look at ways to use materials in new ways, in different ways, and I hope that you'll try. I know the technique is hard when you're seeing it virtually. I wish I could be there in person with all of you, and I really hope to do that soon. I hope 2021 allows us the opportunity to do so, but you can always come back to your sessions that we have on TSFA On Demand. You can look at them, you can pause your screen, you can go back, take some time, and really nail it yourself. So you get to the point where you can create that structure I showed you in under 3 minutes. I know that you can do it. And please, if you do, tag TSFA on Instagram, on Facebook, and also send it to me. I'd love to see your work. By all means, ask us any questions anytime. Thank you so much to TSFA and all the incredible underwriters for allowing us to come to your home, connect with you, and to share a little bit about what we do.
Thank you, Stacey. A couple of questions before we do go. They
Of
did
course.
come in last minute. Do you just feed the stems through to make the regular bouquet?
Yes. So that's a great question. So this one is done just in a hand-tied fashion, spiral as well. All of the stems have been threaded through the bottom. Once again, you're going to see that Spanish moss treatment on the back. You don't have to do it. You could still do, even if you had a spiral hand-tied, you could add a really beautiful color of like magnolia foliage, which would give you that suede kind of textured look on the back, or even something a little bit more easy to procure, like salal or leather. If you have that in your shop, then you can do a color. But I really like the idea of the moss. So yes, all threaded through. And once again, the only two items that were glued in last minute here were the Phalaenopsis orchid blooms here, and a few of these golden, locally foraged ginkgo biloba leaves. Everything else has a water source through the bottom. Tip though, if you are gonna spray with a sealant like Crowning Glory or Finishing Touch, be mindful that you have the ringneck pheasant feathers from Knut Nielsen in there, and you don't wanna spray those too heavily. So perhaps you add those after you do your sealant.
Thank you. And can we show one more time how to attach the Oasis grid wire to the woven handle, like the base platform, how you have it all together? I know you showed it previously, but
tell me again. I'm sorry. Of course we can, but what did you ask again? I'm sorry.
How to attach the Oasis grid wire to the woven
yes. So that
handle or base?
That's a really great question. So it's hard to show you because this one's a little bit bigger, well, actually a lot bigger. But I can kind of mimic it. So if we go back to our other view here, let's see. And I moved it out of the way for you guys. So when you look at, now I've got Spanish moss on my table. Excuse me for 1 sec. Okay, so when you look at this bouquet here, imagine this being much, much smaller. Once again, when I was saying that I did this as a base for my the bouquet number 2 that I showed you, I only used 8 wires. We have 14 here, so this is excessive. You definitely don't need this many. You can probably get away with 6 maybe, but all of these wires here, I did it in a snowflake grid like this, and it wasn't extended beyond. So what you could do is these wires here, all they need to do is be threaded through this wire, and I can trim it just to show you guys. So once again, not this many. You definitely don't need this many. But if we trim this here, when you're making yours, make yours much, much smaller because you don't want to have to go through all of this sweeping and work just to trim it and come back and do this. Okay, so now we've got this out of the way. And we'll look at just this one side here. Once again, this is also not completely finished, just because we would be on here much longer than our allotted 30 if I finish this all for you. But the bottom of this, of your actual structure here with the Oasis floral mesh, you would take your wires here, these wires, and thread them through the floral mesh, just like this, hoping that you guys can see that. So once again, all I did was take this edge and put it through the wire, and I'm bending it and folding it back in on itself. Do you see that? So it's harder with this one because it's thicker, and this bouquet structure was made for my 3rd bouquet. So we would make it a little bit thinner, and you can just twist it right back in and it supports itself. And you would repeat that all around the entire perimeter of the bouquet. Once again, if you felt like you needed that double mechanic, but you don't because you're wrapping wire around wire, you may always use a tail of the bind wire in any of these cross sections too if you feel like you need more of a mechanic. So this base can be adhered to another existing structure, just like we've shown here, or it can be a freestanding base. If you want to go back to the other view, like we did with that larger bouquet. So I know we went really technique heavy. We were in a really small crunched amount of time. But once again, if any of those steps don't feel solid to you and you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out and I'd be happy to follow up with you. And then once again, you can go through and view these sessions again, pause them, review them, come back to them later if you feel a little bit frustrated, but I encourage you to try today's techniques and make them work for your brand.
Thank you, Stacey, and thank you all for joining us today. We would like to take the time to thank our Texas Flora Education underwriters for making TSFA virtual learning possible. Barry's product during today's demonstration was provided by Smithers Oasis and Schusters of Texas Incorporated. Thanks again, and we will see you all next time.